section, but I'm not expecting parents to stop watching now, because you might want to look at this to make sure that teachers in your school are doing so. Keep watching. So preparations for teachers. So this is about supporting children returning to school. This is a kind of an overarching thought that it's very important. I mean, I'll get to the other stuff first, but this kind of sets the tone really. It's really important to consider our use of language surrounding the context of our COVID-19 experience, because everything that you hear, understandably, is very negative. Language surrounding everyone's everyday experience, there's a current tendency to catastrophize everything. So it's like everybody's on high alert emotionally, and the simplest things become catastrophized. And I just get the impression from everybody that I meet that everyone's emotionally a little bit fragile at the moment, which is understandable. In terms of language, you may have different ways that you want to reframe the language, but I can't remember where I saw this, but this was suggested. Changing words like lockdown, because that sounds like something from a Hollywood movie. Lockdown. It's probably better to refer to it as something like current restrictions, or your own terminology. Social distancing, because that now has negative connotations, because it's like everybody's a potential source of virus, rather than we just need to keep a safe distance from each other just in case. We could rephrase it to something like safe relating. You could have your own phrases, but I'm just highlighting the ones that are very emotionally charged. New normal, which is like a way of saying these crazy times that we live in should really be rephrased to something like the protection phase, because what we're doing is putting it in a positive light rather than focusing on the negative stuff. And think of a new word for self-isolation. It was suggested contact pause, but I'm not entirely sure whether that just sounds like just a different way of saying it for its own sake, but come up with your own. So that was just a general overall thing. So in order to help parents support their children getting back into school, in another video, well, actually the section above, I mentioned making a my going back to school book, and I explained it earlier. If you fast forwarded to this bit, I'm going to just explain it again. So basically, the layout of the book should vary with age and key stage. But the important thing is that it reinforces the notion of going back to school. I've already given the examples before, so I'm looking forward to seeing I have missed, how I can help, how we wash our hands, what I did during lockdown, what helped me learn when I was at home, what I would like my teacher to know about my worries. And the reason I mention it in the teacher section, even though I've mentioned it in the parent section, is because I think it would be useful for schools to have this available on their website. So this is one less job for parents to do. I know it's another job for teachers, but it has multiple benefits for teachers. And you know, if you think it's a good idea and you want parents to do it, then it's easy enough to provide. It's rather than people reinventing the wheel the whole time, because there will be some parents who this may just not be their thing to do, but if they were just able to have access to it, they could they could download it. For parents who don't have printers, you might want to send them one through the post. You problem solve, with your own sort of demographic population at school. The next bit is more specifically schooly and class-based if those are proper words. So this is about helping you get an overview of what's going on when your children returning to school. So in your class, it's important to make a list of all children. Beside each child's name, there should be a column, so that's their name, then there's a column identifying the additional needs that they have, and then the challenges presented by the needs, and then a list of school responses to these needs. And you will probably find that particular types of difficulties can be aggregated into a sort of a common response, i.e. everybody will need the same things to support them within school. I mean, that's just the starting point. It's too difficult really to drill down into the detail there. But obviously this is something to think about, and I'm giving broad responses to the notion of returning to school. I mean, obviously all children will need a little bit of care, and well, they'll obviously need care, but they'll need some sort of thought about how you might want to integrate them back into school. But there are some children who clearly will need more. Those children with autistic spectrum disorder, or autistic spectrum condition, or a social communication difficulty that is not that's not actually specified, but you're aware of. Those children who have ADHD, just thinking about how they're going to maintain social distance. I mean, if they're finding it difficult to sit in their seats, they're going to be finding it difficult to social distance, so that's another consideration. Children who might be obsessive, have an obsessive compulsive disorder, that might be relating to their autistic spectrum disorder. And there might be issues to do with hand washing. Those children with attachment and anxiety, how are they going to actually get into school? Children who have had a bereavement and either relating to COVID-19 or a bereavement in the past where all this other kind of numbers of bereaved goes up daily. They may have constant triggers and reminders of their own emotional reactions to that, even if I don't mean even, but it might be a pet, it might be a close family member, a relatively distant family member, or a family friend, and we need to be sensitive to those. Children who've got their own sort of children whose parents have their own emotional issues and might actually not want their child to return to school because they need their child for emotional support. That's a difficult one to unpick. Children with health conditions that make them more vulnerable, they may not be in school in any case, but they will have to be supported. How can they be supported? They might feel left out because they're not going back into school. On the other hand, they might actually feel pleased that they're not going back into school, but that may only serve further to make them more difficult to reintegrate into school in the long term. Children whose parents have lost their job due to COVID-19, doubtless there will be lots of parents who have fallen victim to the sort of global economy and the result of social distancing, and there will be those children who, this is more for September, so it's those children who've not had the opportunity of a planned transition. So there will be children who are expecting to go across a key stage like EYFS to year 1, or year 6 to year 7, or year 11 to year 12, or children with additional educational needs who've not had an enhanced transition to somewhere. So all of this, and you will be already thinking about this, but these are just things to mention. So support around school and in class, it's very important for all children. It may be more important for those with a social, with SLCN, speech language communication needs. if they have got a poor short-term memory, or they have got difficulties understanding things, or they have difficulty listening, or they've got difficulty paying attention, or they don't know what thing to pay attention to, or they're too anxious, all of those kind of difficulties, they will need lots of visual support, and these are some of the ones that are felt to be key. Picture of new classroom layout, that's an important one. Visuals for any new class routines, because undoubtedly things will be different. Visual instructions for distancing, and you could show sort of pictures. You might be using a table's width that children need to stand apart. You might be using a 6 floor tiles widths or something. You'll work it out, or you might have put tape in the class on the floor, and you're not allowed to stand in another child's square. All of those kind of things. It's whatever you've decided, but present it visually. These are things that most schools will be doing already and have already thought of, but it's just worth putting out. In the morning, children may find it difficult to spontaneously tell you that they're feeling anxious, that they're feeling sad, that they're feeling worried, that they're cross, that they're whatever. So a register in the morning where somehow, without breaking social distancing not regulations, what are they, advice or whatever it's called, so without breaking the social distancing instructions, they would be able to indicate in some way by pointing to a picture in some way, depending on the layout of your class, just to indicate whether they're happy with a smiley face or sad with a sad face or whatever. It's just a way of doing it. You may want to give the child a key fob with all the different faces on. You might want to give them something in their bag that they can hold up. You might want to. There are lots of different ways. You might want to point to the picture saying how particular people are feeling, and then it's hands up. I might not suggest that one, because people might just put their hands up with whatever the majority of people are feeling or what their friend's doing. So it needs to be a bit more because we know that children with ASD have proprioceptive difficulties. The distance judging skills are poor in some cases. Again, the new classroom layout is going to be difficult for some certain children. It's going to throw them. They're already in a routine of going and sitting in a certain place. They're not going to like the new routine, etc., etc., etc. If they've got high levels of anxiety, this is only going to exacerbate it. There are other issues that some children with SLCN need their learning support assistants like that close. They're commonly sitting really, really close. And in the kind of new situation, I don't know what we agreed to call it, in the new situation that we're in, that's likely that it's not going to be as possible to have a child right next to an adult at that level. So we're going to need to think of a way of making that emotional support or the giving instructions or whatever more explicit. The new structure and limitations and layout of the current situation will make the style of teaching more sort of didactic, by which I mean it's going to be a lot of children sitting and listening, because all of the active learning styles, with group learning, all of the different ways, the lovely different ways that are available in a regular classroom, primary class, are going to have to alter considerably for the foreseeable future. And in planning those types of lessons, it's going to be important to take account of that and have breaks, institute different kinds of ways of working across the morning and the afternoon. So moving on to that's thinking about the needs of a variety of groups of children in class and how they can be supported. This is a way of being mindful of children's emotional health, mental health, levels of anxiety. So I alluded to this earlier on by saying children have had the biggest holiday they've ever had. Children have spent a considerable amount of time at home, and they may have an extreme emotional reaction to returning to school. They may have experienced the notion of being stuck at home because the outside world was a terribly scary place, and it might be considered to be a trigger for something like post-traumatic stress disorder. It might be a traumatic issue. I mean, the majority of children won't have experienced it as such, but for some children, the definition of a post-traumatic stress disorder is, either one or two very extreme distressing situations, or repeated exposure to a distressing situation over a prolonged period of time without any other support. That's a broad brush definition. It's not like from the DSM-5, but it's in that area. So it would be important to see what effect this has had for certain vulnerable groups, and even children that have not been brought to your attention before may actually now fall into that category. They may find the whole thing distressing to the point where it's had some sort of emotional impact on them that isn't readily sort of resolved. What is likely is that increased separation anxiety will occur from key parents, key adults. It's possible, and adults need to be aware of symptoms of trauma, either ones that they've had in the past or ones relating to the current restrictions might come into place. And it may also be necessary to carry out death and life education. That's, just talking about on a very, very factual basis. So things, and I've put a reference to that in the reference section, which you can get as a PDF, and it's something to do. It's an article on the Institution of Education's blog, dated May 2020. It's also useful to adults who teach. It's also useful for adults to teach children who do not return with their peers for whatever reason. So a child who's not returning with their peers needs to be able to use video conferencing or whatever it is, whatever ways that they're going to get support proficiently. And I've worked with a few young people recently over the internet and, or should I say, video conferencing, and I've had a lot of working with children whose faces are this far away, which I'm sure that was quite distressing for most of you to see my face close up. Or another child who was doing that at the... at me or at the camera or whatever. So my experiences of other people who say using a device for the first time, you might end up just getting a picture of someone's forehead or whatever. It won't take long, but it's worth sorting it out early on in order that children get the best out of it. And why wouldn't you? It's something easily remedied. So communicate to parents. This is important. Communicating to parents return plans in as much detail as possible. It's likely that the parents of children with SEN will need even more support and information, but it wouldn't hurt just giving that level of detail to all. So in kind of a rough order, this would be useful. I'm sure there's loads of other versions of this. These were just my thoughts, and are kind of obvious, but hey, it doesn't hurt repeating them. So what happens before school opens? Has the school layout been changed? Are there new school rules? Are there changes to school personnel? any other sorts of changes. What should parents do to support their children? So in relation to this, schools could put online resources to parents for parents to use before they return to school. So that should be stressed that actually this period of time now, it's one of the things that parents could do most usefully, rather than necessarily trying to teach them additional educational stuff, is help their children getting back into school. If that was the one thing that they did, which was prepare their child for having a really good transition back into school, then that would be a really useful thing to do. So that would be a good thing for them to sort of focus on. You could make available on your school website or send direct to your parents. Parents of children in your school. My return to school book as a template, maps of classrooms and where your child might be, picture of school adults, in order that parents can print them off and put them into my school book handbook, hand washing routines, social distancing routines, playtime arrangements, changes in lunchtime arrangements, frequently asked questions, worries that children might have, and the way that the school has thought to overcome them. You might even want to have some facility on the school website. And I don't know how dynamic school websites are, so that might be a problem. It might be that school has no control over their own website, and there's a little chap or a little lady who manages the website for them, and is currently doing hundreds of school websites. So you just have to do it in the best way you can. A frequently asked questions page, like what children might worry about, and the ways that school have thought of overcoming them, and examples of something positive. What children can look forward to after the lockdown is open. So when we have finished lockdown, the school is planning to celebrate by blah 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 blah, or we will be starting a performance of such and such and such and such. Something really positive that the children can look forward to. A big event that maybe the parents are invited to, or that grandparents are invited to. Something special for the children, something special for each class maybe, or certain groups or whatever, but just some way of looking beyond the current situation. It's also really important that there's clear news about any staff who might have been ill, in order to prevent rumours. So what have staff done? Have any staff been ill? Have any staff left? But they've left for reasons other than anything to do with the current situation. And in the sad event that there has been a bereavement among the school community of a key adult, like sensitive but realistic information that can prevent any rumours, because otherwise children will spread their own rumours, and that's not helpful really. And the tone of that school information needs to be light-hearted, friendly and humorous. Picture of Mr. Smith, sort of what he got up to on his holidays. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all back at school, and that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously that depends on the style of your school, because some schools may not be able to accommodate that particular style, but I don't see why. And then some advice on what parents can do at home to help support their child's return to school. You might want to refer them to the beginning bit of this video. Additional information on what will happen on the first day of school, information on what will be the same at school, because children will want to know what the same is at school. What will be different at school, because again, because if you are only saying what's different, then that isn't the same as saying what's the same, because not explicitly saying, well, everything else is the same, but these are the small changes. Children may think everything's changed. So if you can say, well, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same, then obviously that will make children feel more comfortable. It's also important to talk about talk about staffing. So are there any new staff? And if so, who, what phase, what do they do? Are they a teacher? Are they a TA? Blah, blah, blah. Are there any staff that are going to be absent or long-term absent? And if so, why, with limited details? Are there any staff that aren't returning, with details? Because obviously some of the staff may have been retiring anyway, some of the staff may be moving on to new schools, and God forbid some staff may be not returning because they're too ill to return, or because they're because of other sort of more serious reasons. Any changes to an individual child's key work is essential. I know most people will know that, all schools will know that, but it's worth repeating that if there is any difference, then that needs to be supported in the normal means, like photographs, telephone conversations. So for instance, if a child does have a new key worker, would it be useful? Is it possible? Can they have a video meeting with the child before the term starts? Not just one video meeting, maybe a few video meetings, just so that they're more comfortable with a child, with an adult that they've never met before, being their support on the first day. Should head teachers do an online welcome back assembly for children before the term starts? And how will any phased return work? Some children may be in later, some children, I would doubt that all children will be back on day one, even taking into account that we may be just talking about certain year groups. I would imagine that it would be a phased return, and how to manage that equitably, because some children might feel that they want to be back first, or that they may not want to be back first. And you've got to manage that. You've got to be really explicit about what why children are in the first group back, or why they've been asked to remain at home while their peers are coming back in. Is that because they're not as welcome as other children? We don't want them to feel that, so you want them to, give other reasons, that they're more mature, or we've got other reasons for getting children back in, and we're letting the young ones come in first, or whatever. So that is an important thing. So we've talked about phased return. How does your social distancing in school work? That has got so many different facets to it that I can't possibly describe it all now, and that would be very relevant to the layout of your own school and the needs of the school. Will there be any changes to the physical layout of the school, including corridor transitions? So the classrooms may be laid out with bigger spaces. There may be tape on the floor to divide squares and quadrants where children are instructed to go to. Certain areas may be prohibited. There may be a one-way system round corridors. Playtimes will be different. All of those kind of things just need to be made clear. Expectations for hand and mouth hygiene. Will there be access to soapy water in classrooms? Will there be tissues for each individual child, or in a particular place in a classroom or within the school? For a small number of children, you might think to yourself, right, well, following information from parents, I'm getting the impression that this child is particularly anxious. So it might be necessary to use a questionnaire either for the child or for the adult to describe about their own child. An example of a questionnaire which has been devised for children returning to the Oxfordshire Hospital School, has been kindly provided by Steve Lowe, who's a fantastic chap and the head of the Oxfordshire Hospital School Services, and I've put a link to that in my description in my PDF. So there are 2 questionnaires. There's one for parents about children, there's one for children about how they feel. You may wish to adapt those questionnaires in some way. You may want to increase the scale from a 3-point scale to a 5-point scale to avoid children just going anxious, 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 anxious when they're actually only a little bit anxious. So just to make it more sensitive, you might want to do that. But that's entirely up to you. But it's very useful because lots of areas have been already thought about. I just wanted to finish off by saying an Italian study has provided the following advice. Now, I guess they were ahead of us, and so because they were ahead of us, they're in a different phase, and they've already started to think about, children going back to school. So, this one is the title of the study is "Empowering Children Through Re-entry Activities After COVID-19 Pandemic," and it's by Caperson et al. Spring 2020. If you Google that, you should be able to find it. But I have included a link to that in my PDF, and you should just click on that. I've got links to lots of other research as well. So it means that the PDF is more than just a summary of the spoken parts of my presentation. It has got lots of other interesting resources as well, including this one, and the other resources are things like more descriptive, more tailored descriptions for how to get children with ASD back into school. There's like 5 videos by a speech and language therapist called Lynn McCann, I think it is. There are descriptions of how to start your child thinking about getting back into school. There is the information about the study that I'm just about to say about the Italian study. There is links to Steve Lowe's questionnaires, and there are lots of other links as well that are useful. But anyway, returning to this study focuses on how to support coping and resilience in children, empowering the children through re-entry activities after COVID-19 pandemic. Caperson et al. Spring 2020. The central theme of the study is that it's important not to just jump straight back into the curriculum at the point where the children left it. I mean, I'm saying stuff that most people will probably know already. Children need to make sense of their experiences and process them before they will need to feel secure enough to learn. So it's suggested that schools enable children to share their coping strategies. And there's a whole bunch of activities that are described, and there's for this purpose and for helping children to process their feelings and thoughts on COVID-19. Remember that feelings and thoughts are different things, and they may need to be sort of addressed in a different sort of way. Children might be thinking, oh yeah, no, this is all safe, but they might be feeling, oh, I'm not too sure about it, and so they need to be able to examine those in different sorts of ways. There are resources, as far as I remember, for key stage, for early years, and then primary years, and then secondary years, and there are different activities, and it's nicely set out. And even if you don't like specifically the way that it's done, it's a good starting point for other stuff. Okay, so that is the end of this presentation. I'm conscious that I haven't explained who I am or why I'm talking about this or anything about me, but there will be lots of you who already know who I am, and for those who don't, you can check it out on my website. this really isn't meant as a sort of a self-promotion exercise. It was just that I was asked to do something, so here it is, and it's for what it's worth. So I'm just, if you've enjoyed it, then that's good. If you haven't, if you found it useful, then obviously you can share it. There will be things there that you've already thought about. There'll be things there that you won't have thought about. There'll be things there you think, oh, that's kind of a good idea, but I've got a better one. Well, if that is the case, then that's brilliant, because there's a springboard for other thoughts. Please click below my video for a link to the document for this presentation that follows the script. And I'd just like to say thank you for watching. I doubt seriously that anyone's got to the end, because it's now approaching 1 minute, 1 hour and 20 seconds of presentation. I may divide this into two. Thank you for watching, and good luck with all the transitioning stuff. Please get in contact with me if you have any concerns relating to what I've said in the video. Well, not concerns, but any additional thoughts on what I've said in the video, or whether your school may need some sort of support, because actually, after having said and done, I am an educational psychologist. So yeah, okay, thank you very much. Bye.